Hi there, and thank you for visiting. This is Jennifer McGuire. So in my videos, I really like to stretch my supplies and do my best to get the most out of them. A lot of times this means using them creatively. And today I thought I would focus on using your sentiments creatively. So I will be showing you several different techniques for using sentiments to build backgrounds. Also, we'll be layering with stamps and stencils and more to step up those backgrounds, to give them a unique look. So really, it's about using all your products together to create something special. I will first start with an easier technique where I use one sentiment stamp set, but then I will build that up to show you how you can mix sentiments from several different sets together for a technique. So this is all about stretching those supplies, and I have loads of examples for you. And at the end, I even show how to use all my leftover scraps from the video onto a card. Okay, for my first technique, I'll be using this new 6x8 stamp set from Simon Says Stamp. It's called Inside Friendship Messages. The reason I chose this stamp set is the friend theme. I could use these all for a background, and then whatever focal point sentiment I put on top can change up. So the background would be friendship, and then I could add hello or happy birthday or thinking of you or whatever on the front. The other reason I like this friendship theme set is because there are lots of sentiments that would be good for stamping on the inside of cards too. So I thought this would be a good one to demonstrate with today. I'll be using a MISTI stamping tool here, but I will mention in a moment how you can do this without a stamping tool. So I have my stamp set here, all the stamps are on it, and I'm flipping back that clear backing. So I have all of my stamps exposed. So it's like one giant stamp set, or one giant stamp, I should say. I'll put tape on the outside edges of this stamp set. The reason I'm doing this is I am going to tape this stamp set as is into my stamping tool. So I'm putting the tape so the sticky side is facing up. I'll put a few pieces, you don't need much, and you can reuse this tape later on. It's just to hold it in the stamping tool as we stamp. I'm now laying the set down into the stamping tool, and the tape, or the sticky part of the tape, is facing up. I'll close my MISTI door. I'm going to flip it over just to make sure it stays there, and then I'll press all the tape down. So now I have all of these stamps ready to stamp. So I could have removed each one individually, but I wouldn't be sure if they were all straight. This is a huge time saver, and I'll just stamp the stamp set as is, just as one giant stamp. If you do not have a stamping tool, all you would do is lay this stamp set on your work surface with the stamping portion facing up. Then you can ink it up and then lay your cardstock onto it. And that's the best way to stamp a background. Okay, so I have a sticky mat here. I just order a big sticky mat and cut it to fit into my MISTI stamping tool, and I'll link to what I use below. And that will just help me with doing a lot of stamping. You could also just temporarily tape your card in place. Now I went through my note card stash, and I had these leftover note cards. Whenever I cut a piece of cardstock, I get 2 cards. And on previous videos, I used the one, and I had these left over. So I just grabbed a few of them to use here. While I have the stamp set in here, I might as well do multiple note cards. I can then save them for future use. Okay, over here, I'm lining up one of my note cards with the stamp so I can be sure they'll stamp straight. I then close my MISTI upside down, and that sticky mat grabs the note card. And now I can be sure that when I stamp it, it'll be straight on that note card. So I'm inking this up. I'm using Ballet Slipper ink from Concord and Ninth. You can use absolutely any inks you want. I just grabbed whatever colors best matched the note card. I'm going for a soft tone-on-tone look here, but you could go bold if you prefer. And so you can see here how I took a stamp set with individual sentiments and turned it into a background stamp. So I continued to do this on more note cards. Keep in mind you also can stamp these at an angle to make your background a little more interesting. And you can also change up whatever inks you do. Most of mine are tone-on-tone, but you could do heat embossing, you could do bold colors, anything. You can also stamp a horizontal or landscape card. This is a stamp set that's bigger. It's 6 inches wide, so it works great for a horizontal card also. Now you can keep these backgrounds as is, set them aside, and have them ready for future cards, or you can step them up and add more layering to it. Here I'm using a background stamp from Simon Says Stamp. This is a new one, and I'm crazy about it. It's called Radiating Hearts. So what I'm doing here is stamping on top of my sentiment background with a white pigment ink. So here we have one of our backgrounds nice and bold. I'm lining it up over my stamp so I can center up the stamped image on the note card. Close my MISTI, and there we have it, ready to stamp straight. So this is Hero Art's Unicorn White Pigment Ink. Any white pigment ink would work here. You could even use a metallic if you want to. Inking up my stamp, and I'll stamp right on top. So now I have this fun layered background, and it's kind of like an optical illusion. Depending on how you tilt it in the light, you see more of the white hearts or the dark sentiments. So I'm going to stop here, and I'll share more sentiment background techniques in a moment, but I want to turn this one into a card. I came up with this window floating heart technique that I really wanted to share, and I'll show you more versions of it later too. Okay, so for this, I'm using the new Simon Says stamp, Thank You for Being a Friend die. I thought that would be fun along with our friendship background. But remember, you can put any sentiment theme you want on here. Thank you would be great too. I also have some heart dies from a Hero Art Stacking Heart die set, but you could do circles, you could do squares, I'll do stars later too. I'm using this large heart to cut a window on the bottom of our card. So I opened up the note card, ran it through my die cut machine, and now we have our heart window. And I'll keep the heart we cut out for a card that I do at the end of this video. Now I used the Thank You for Being a Friend die and cut 3 times from white cardstock and glued those together for dimension. I'm now putting liquid adhesive on the back. This is Gina K Connect. Before I add it to my card, I'm taping my card temporarily onto my work surface so that I can use the grid line to make sure I place this pink heart die cut center. So see how I'm centering it up there? Just holding it there with some tape. And then I will take my die cut and press that down over everything. So this Thank You for Being a Friend die cut is actually connecting everything together. So that pink heart will be floating inside of the larger heart window. So I'll just press that down, and then once it's dry, I can remove all of the tape. Now here I'm just putting a piece of scrap cardstock underneath to remove it from my work surface, and there you can see how it's floating there. I also added a white cardstock piece to the inside of the card. Now off screen, I die cut several more hearts using the heart stacking die set from Hero Arts. So we have some as big as our window and then some smaller. These will go on the inside of the card. Here I'm removing the tape since we have everything dry now, and you can see that floating heart and sentiment. Now there is a little bit of adhesive exposed there on that white that's peeking through. It's dried and it's not sticky anymore, but some adhesives stay sticky even after they dry. So you might want to use an anti-static powder tool on there to remove that stick. But with Gina K adhesive, you don't need to worry about that. Okay, so now I have a large heart the same size as the window. I'm putting adhesive on it and lining it up with my window, and then I'll close my card on it. That places that large heart on the inside so it shows through to the front also. I then adhered 2 additional hearts, and on one of them I white heat embossed Hello Friend from the Friendship Sentiment stamp set that I showed you earlier. This is a fun way for the design of your card to carry through to the inside of the card too. As accents for the card, I use the Simon Says stamp Mini Hearts Party die. I use this die an awful lot. It cuts 3 different size hearts and a bunch of them. So you can use them as accents on your card. So I arranged different pink hearts onto the card, and then I glued 2 more layers onto each heart. I like that added dimension, but you could definitely leave it as 1 layer hearts if you prefer. For a little bit of shimmer on the hearts, I used the Tonic Aqua Shimmer pen, and then I added a layer of glossy accents on top of that. So this will give it sparkle, shine, and a bit of shiny dimension. So here's a look at the completed card. I will show variations of this later on, and I'll show how I did the matching envelope too. So you can see through the front of the card to the inside, which is a fun way to carry the design from the outside to the inside. And there you can see that layered background where we use the sentiments as a background stamp, and how we stamped the white heart background on top. Creates a fun optical illusion. Before we move on to my other sentiment background technique, I want to create 2 more cards using some of the backgrounds I made with the sentiment stamp set earlier. Now on this one, I'm building another layer of sentiments on top. I'll be using the Simon Says stamp Everything Together stamp set that has lots of large, bold sentiments. I thought these would be fun to layer with. So I have one of the note cards from earlier where I stamped that Friendship Sentiment stamp set with white pigment ink on top. You can see it there in my MISTI. Now I'm lining up some of those bold sentiments on top, but doing it at an angle for some fun. Now this time I will stamp with a dye ink that matches our note card. So this is Hero Art's Fresh Peach ink, and I'll stamp that on top of the white sentiments we already did. And this will just create a layered background fun of all sentiments. So that's another way you can stretch your sentiments. Take some small type sentiments and layer them with some bold handwritten sentiments like these. So I did the first round of sentiments. I moved the sentiments around a bit, and now I've completed stamping over the entire card. By the way, a few people have asked what happens when you stamp on your sticky mat. All I do is I wipe it with a wet cloth or baby wipe just to remove that ink, and it doesn't seem to affect the stickiness. And I'll just use that baby wipe a few times. So there you can see the fun layered look. I really like this one, and I wish I would have stamped a few more like it while I had all the stamps assembled together, but next time. So I ended up trimming that down to be about 4 by 5 1/4, and I'm gluing it onto a note card that is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I'll end up making this a tri-fold card, which will allow us to do a fun sentiment window like we did earlier. So I have another note card, 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, and it'll slide around the back of our main note card. So we'll glue that there, of course, but this is how the card will open. Now there's one thing you need to do to this to make it line up nicely, and that is to trim just a hair off the back of your main note card. So just a little bit over there, and now they'll fit together nicely. The second note card wraps around the back, and there we'll have our trifold card, which I'll glue together after we do some die cutting. Okay, so we're back to just the main note card now. I have a new die set from Simon Says Stamp that's really great. It's the Simon Says Stamp You're Simply the Best die set. It cuts the words, and then there's also a shadow die included. I'll use the shadow die to cut a window in the front of our card. Once that window is die cut, we can glue our two card pieces together to create the trifold. So I've wrapped the second note card around the back of the main note card. We got it all lined up. Now I'll flip it over and put adhesive in there. This glues the two back flaps together. Make sure you get adhesive right up to the edge. And then you will have a fun trifold card. You could do this for a vertical card too. I think it's fun to do a horizontal like this because it's very unusual. Okay, so now we can add the rest of our sentiment and embellishments. I'm using this silver holographic cardstock from Simon Says Stamp that has this really cool kind of molten look to it, like a vintage metal or something, such a unique look. And I'm die cutting that from the main sentiment. Now I originally glued this down into the opening on the front of our card. But after I put it there, I decided I wanted that sentiment to be black. I changed my mind a lot, and I usually edit it out of videos. But in real life, I wanted it to stand out more. I don't know, maybe I made the wrong decision, but I had let that dry, and then I changed my mind, and I just carefully removed it. And you can see in my note card in the white area, there are some torn pieces, but that's okay. I re-die cut it with black, and I'm gluing it on top, and nobody will ever see. And now I have that silver sentiment that I can save for another card. So it's okay to change your mind, even if there's little tears in your note card. Nobody's going to really ever notice, except for everybody watching this video. But anyways, so there you can see the black, and I just felt like it stood out a bit more. I added a bunch of hearts to the front and to the inside, and I stamped You're Amazing, That Is All in the inside also. I like those little bonus sentiments when you open the card. So I did use that silver cardstock for the hearts, and I really like the look that it gives. Now notice my background, we have the layered sentiments, we have the white, and then we have the peach. I wish I would have used a darker peach ink because when it dried it softened, but I'll do that next time. It does show up more in real life. Also keep in mind a card design like this is one that can be used with many different backgrounds. So I used my sentiment background here, but you could do an alcohol ink background, a gel press background. If you're like me, you probably have a bunch of backgrounds waiting to be used. It would be great for this card design. Okay, one more example before we move on to the next background technique. This is a pretty quick one, and again, it's a universal design that you can use with a lot of different products you probably have. Now for this one, I started with a note card where I stamped those sentiments with white pigment ink. Now I'm taking a stencil and lining it up on top, and I'll just use a little bit of tape to hold it in place. There are a few ways to do this, but this seemed the easiest at the time. Okay, so now on top of this, I'm adding Tim Holtz Distress Oxide ink in Worn Lipstick, which the first time I did this voiceover, I called it Torn Lipstick, which doesn't really work. Worn Lipstick is much better. Anyways, I'm applying this on top of the stencil. Now, since this has some pigment properties to it, you won't really see the white pigment ink behind the hearts. So the pink will block out the white that's behind it. If you wanted the white pigment ink to show through, you could have used a dye ink here, but the color wouldn't stay as true because it's on craft. So now we have these beautiful pink hearts with white text around them. Okay, so I originally cut a smaller heart window, didn't think it was big enough, so I found this other heart that I thought worked better, and I die cut a window from the front of the card. Now I wanted to have this cute little bear peeking out. This is from the new Simon Says stamp, I Love You Very Much stamp set. So many great things in here, and I'll use the sentiments in my next cards. But for this one, I just stamped the bear and colored him. I could have just stamped him on the white panel on the inside, but I didn't think of it at the time. So I stamped him and cut him out. Now I'll put him on the inside so he's peeking out through the bottom of the heart. So it just looks like a bear from the front. But then when you open it, you see the heart that he's holding. I did want to make the heart window stand out a bit more. So here's a trick that you can do to create a frame for a window. I took that heart die and I'm tracing the outside of the die onto black cardstock. You can't see it in the video, but in real life you can see the pencil line. I will then cut around that pencil line. Remember, there is a metal trim or edge around dies. So when I cut this pencil line, it'll cut a heart that's bigger than our die cut window. After I've cut it out, I'll take the die, tape it right on top, centered up on our heart, run it through our die cut machine, and then we end up with this thin heart frame that we can glue around the heart window on the front of our card. I felt like that made this pop a little bit more and brought the focus to that bear. I stamped Hi Friend and a sentiment on the inside heart, both from the Friendship Sentiment stamp set that I showed you earlier, so it matches with the background nicely. This design really would work great with different critter stamp sets, or maybe create a scene on the inside. It's fun to have just a little bit peeking out on the front and the surprise on the inside. By the way, the envelope that I used on this is from Honeybee Stamps. They came out with a set of envelopes that are patterned paper like this. I love it. And this one just seemed to match perfectly for this card, which is 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Okay, now let's get into the second background technique. Now this one involves a little bit more setup than the first one, but I definitely prefer the results. And this is good if you have several different sentiments from different sets you want to use together. Now, I have done a video showing this technique many years ago. I'll link to it up here if you want some more ideas. So I have my MISTI stamping tool, and I'm putting a piece of cardstock in here that's 4 1/4 by 5.5. This is just a guide for me. Over that, I'm putting my sticky mat, which you don't need to do, but I found it a little bit helpful. Now I'm taking a bunch of different sentiments from the sets I've already shown you in this video, and I'm arranging them tight together. I start in one corner using that white cardstock in the background as a guide, and I fill in the area the best I can. If there are little gaps, you could always put little heart images or little flower images or dots there. I just put them as close as I could together, creating my own sentiment background stamp. The fun way of doing it this way is you can mix different styles together. Okay, so now that I've covered all of that area, I'll close the door on my stamping tool, and I've grabbed all of those stamps. So I basically created my own background that I can stamp over and over. I'm putting little marks on where to put the note card onto my sticky mat. I don't mind if those marks stay there, it doesn't bother me. And now each time I can place the note card in those little marks and continue to do my stamping. If you do not have a stamping tool, you could always arrange your stamps onto a clear piece of plastic on your desk, and then ink up your stamps, and then lay the note card on top. For this particular example, I had already stamped that heart background with white pigment ink, and I'm stamping the sentiments with a darker dye ink on top. I really like that layering that you get with colored dye inks and white pigment ink. So while all those stamps are in my MISTI stamping tool, I stamped a bunch of note cards. Some of them I stamped with white pigment ink, some I did with colored dye ink, just so I had a bunch on hand. I wish I would have done more. Next time I definitely will, because there are so many different ways you can use these. Now you could leave them as is, but I wanted to show you a bunch of different ways to add more to these backgrounds for that layered look. So in this first example, I took one of our stamped backgrounds with white pigment ink, and I'm adding a floral image over it. This is the Simon Says Stamp Best Friend Forever stamp set. I love that flower in the top right corner. It'd be great to color, but I'm just using it on my background today. So I have one of my note cards where I stamped the sentiments with white pigment ink. Now I'm stamping with blue ink this stamp on top of it. Now notice I'm doing a trick here. I'm stamping it in the top right corner of the note card. Then I'll rotate the note card and I'll stamp it again in the bottom left corner. That way I can quickly cover the background and it just saves some time. But basically you can take any image and repeatedly stamp it over your white pigment sentiment background, and it gives that fun layered look. The darker the ink, the more it'll stand out. I went with the blue ink, this is Persian blue from Altenew, on this kind of purplish background so it would stand out a bit more. And it's such a fun background. Another layering idea, of course, is just using a background stamp. If you use a background stamp, I think any type of background stamp with large open areas or large solid stamped areas is the best, so it doesn't fight with the sentiments you've already stamped. I thought this XOXO, since it's bold, would work well, and you can see that fun layered look. By the way, I will be turning these into completed cards in a little bit. Okay, another way you can use these sentiment backgrounds is to do a detail piercing die over the sentiment background. This one is from Simon Says Stamp. I've used it many times in videos. It cuts the outside edge, but the rest of the pattern on the inside is just a pierced hole pattern. So I cut this yellow panel, and look how cool it is to have the sentiments in the background, stamped with a yellow dye ink, but then you have the piercing pattern with it. You could also use an embossing folder to add texture to your sentiment background. Let's do a few ideas for using a stencil for layering over your sentiment background. This is the Simon Says Stamp Scattered Stars stencil. I love this guy. Now I'm putting a teal ink over this. This is Turquoise Sea, I believe, from Gina K Designs. And there you can see what it looks like to have some blue stars over the white pigment ink sentiments. Now you can definitely leave this as is, but I thought I'd add a little bit more to it, even more layering. So I'm lining the stencil back up with the inking we've already done. And on top of that, I'm adding Gina K Glitter Glitz Gel. I found my jar, I'm so excited. This is a clear iridescent glitter gel. What's fun about it is the iridescent glitter in it picks up whatever color is around it and adds a little more color to it. So it's fun on a monochromatic card like this one. So I'll clean off all my tools, clean off my stencil right away, and here we have this beautiful sparkly silver texture. It's one of those that's great when you tilt it in the light, and in real life it really is magical with the white sentiments behind it. Now that iridescent glitter glitz is definitely my favorite, but I have these others I've collected and need to put to use. This is Cosmic Shimmer Platinum Sparkled Texture Paste. It comes in all sorts of colors. This one has like a platinum silver to it, goes on great, and this will stand out a bit more against the colored background. So this layered background technique with sentiment stamps works with any of your pastes or gels that you may have. If you don't have any pastes or gels and want to add sparkle, another option is to put down your stencil and press Versamark ink over it, and then add a sparkle embossing powder. Okay, so I made a bunch of layered note cards here, all using the sentiment background and then something else layered with it. Like here, I did white sentiments and then a blue ink on a green note card for the hearts. So this is a chance to really just explore the different products you have and use them together, all with that fun sentiment background included in it. Now with these really interesting colorful note cards, you could really keep the card simple. Just add a focal point element or sentiment and you can be done. However, I really liked that heart floating window design that I did on my first card, and I wanted to do more of those and change it up a bit. But before I get into all of those cards, I wanted to show you how I did the same technique on the flap of my matching envelopes, because you'll see those envelopes along the way. You could use the sentiments we arranged earlier to stamp on the matching envelope, but I decided to use the Simon Says Stamp Sassy Flaps stamp set because all of these images are meant to go on an envelope. So I went through the stamp set and I picked out the different sentiments I like. Some of them are hilarious, and I'll arrange those onto the envelope flap. I'm going to stamp a bunch of envelopes now while I have it arranged, and they'll be ready to go and will work with any card that I have in the future. So the way I decided to do this is put an envelope with the flap open into my MISTI stamping tool. And over that I put my sticky mat, which just kind of helps hold the sentiments in place until we close the door on the MISTI. You could skip the mat if you want. To make things easier, I decided to arrange the sentiments at an angle. That way you don't have to be sure they're straight when you put them down. So I used all sentiments from the Sassy Flaps stamp set, but then I did incorporate a couple from the Friendship Messages stamp set I showed you earlier. You could use any sentiments you want here. Once I've covered the area of the flap, I'll close the door on my MISTI stamping tool, and now we can go to town stamping. I am putting a piece of scrap paper over the front of the envelope, so I'm only stamping onto the flap. But keep in mind you could do this to the front of the envelope or right along the front edge, but I thought the flap would be perfect, and it keeps the front clean for adding your address and stamp. I get asked a lot about the colored envelopes I use. These today all happen to be Simon Says Stamp brand colored envelopes. I really like the quality and the colors available, and you can see all those fun stamped flaps. Okay, now that we have our note cards and our envelopes together, let's go through the completed cards that I made. For this one, I assembled it just like the first card I shared in this video with that suspended heart along the window. You can see the floral pattern I stamped on top of our white sentiments in the background. I also used that silver holographic cardstock, which really adds a lot of interest to this monochromatic card. And again, when you open it up, you'll see that heart design carried through to the inside. Now on this one, I put the heart towards the top of the card, but I followed the same process. There's plenty of room below the heart here to write your personal message, and it pulls that design to the inside. This is the one where I stamped the XOXO background stamp over the white sentiment background. As you can see from my examples today, this is a great technique for monochromatic cards, and I can use up some of my scraps for the added heart elements. Okay, for my next few cards, I decided to do birthday because I need birthday cards, so I'm using the Simon Says Stamp CZ Design Happy Birthday die. I also will be using the Hero Arts Star die set. Instead of doing the hearts like before, we'll just do star windows. And for the inside of the cards on the small stars, I used the older Simon Says Stamp It's No Secret stamp set. Okay, so I made a bunch of birthday cards using this design. It is assembled the same way as the heart card at the beginning of this video, but instead of hearts, I used stars. I also added some scraps of glitter papers here and there just to kind of pull in a little bit of sparkle to the monochromatic cards. Now, honestly, I don't send birthday cards much, and I'm trying to be better about that in the new year. I tend to send a lot of unexpected cards. Those are my favorite. So I'm trying to make that effort to do the birthday cards so I have them ready to go. All right, here's the one where I used that beautiful iridescent glitter glitz from Gina K Designs, and you can see how it picks up the teal colors. I really like this window technique where you have that floating element so you can see through it. It's really a fun, unexpected card. I do have a lot of layers on here between the die cut words and the die cut stars I add on top, but I love my layers. You can definitely keep your die cuts to one layer thick if you want to cut down on the dimension, and the technique will still work well. If you don't have word die cuts, you could also just stamp a sentiment and stretch that across the window so it holds the floating element. I think this one is my favorite of all of them. I just did the teal stars stencil over the white stamped background, and I used a pop of other colors on the inside. So we have yellow and orange stars also. So you don't just have to do monochromatic for this, although I seem to mostly do monochromatic throughout the video. Okay, I have two cards now that don't have windows, and it's a very simple design using the backgrounds we created. This yellow background is the one where we used the piercing die. So I added a white heart with a similar piercing pattern right to the bottom center. And then I did a sentiment that's heat embossed on a cardstock strip. I also added a bunch of those little hearts around it in peach colors and a few little pearls. So these backgrounds can be used for a very simple card design if preferred. Here's another that doesn't have a window. It's a pretty simple design too. I used the Memory Box Sweet Bay Collage die. I really like the style of this one. And I die cut a window on the bottom, but then I cut the back of the green card off and just added it onto a white note card. You could do the window design technique with this card as is, but I decided not to. I trimmed the background down and added it to a white note card, and then I stamped a sentiment in the window area from the Friendship Messages stamp set that I showed at the beginning of this video. I also added some little flowers and leaf die cuts from an older discontinued Poppy Stamps die, and then also a few pearls. But you could add any little die cut flowers or stamped flowers to this simple design. I like this one in particular because I did a green cardstock but stamped with blue on it, so the blue flowers tie that in together. Okay, now the last card of the video uses the leftover scraps that I had from all the cards I made. So remember how I die cut windows from my note cards? Well, I'm using those all together on one card. Now the background is a Simon Says Stamp Fog note card that I made, and I stamped the sentiments with white pigment ink. Then I added hearts that I had cut out of all of my note cards, so they have the fun patterns on them too. I also added a hug sentiment from the new Memory Box Twiggy Hugs die. I love the look of that. And then a simple sentiment strip across that, and that is from the Simon Says Stamp You Got This stamp set. So remember to keep all of your scraps. They're all fun to combine together on one card. All right, there you have some fun ideas for using your sentiments as backgrounds and then layering them up to create something fun. I also shared lots of ideas for doing window cards, and I really hope you'll give some of these a try. If you are looking for more ideas for sentiment backgrounds, you can check the two videos here in the center. And if you want more information and photos about what we did today, you can click my blog on the top right. Thanks for watching. If this was helpful, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube knows, and I will see you again with another video very soon.